Welcome back to the Fearless Project channel. I'm Dominique Hoffman, and this is The Overlook. And today we have a more somber episode. We're talking about the Annunciation church shooting that happened on the 27th at 8:30 a.m. The church is attached to Annunciation Catholic School. The shooter, Robert Westman, I'm going to go by his birth name, his given name, who transitioned to Robin in 2019, shot into the mass through the stained glass windows, targeting the student section. He knew exactly where the students sat because he himself had been a student at Annunciation Catholic School. His mom had worked there, and he shot over 116 rounds into the church, lasting around 2 minutes before taking his life in the church parking lot. Imagine. It's the third day of school back from summer vacation. You're so excited to be with your friends again. Your parents might be at mass with you because they just dropped you off at school, sitting in the parent section, and then gunfire opens up. Imagine that anguish as a parent sitting across from the student section, seeing your kids helplessly run. There's 18 other victims. 3 of those victims were in their 80s. They were parishioners observing mass. And the other victims were students from the ages of 6 to 15. They are expected to survive their injuries. Praise the Lord. So before I get into the analysis part of this video, I don't want to brush over the victims because I think so quickly, every single time there's a school shooting, the left calls for gun reform. And then it becomes a debate about the culture and politics and why this happened. And I think it's important to look at these events as a temperature for where we are in America, culturally, politically, and spiritually. But the left immediately calls for gun reform. They immediately scoff at the response from Christians around the country as thoughts and prayers, many of them saying prayers aren't enough. And they could not be further from the truth. Prayers are the only thing that are going to help our culture back to truth, capital T, back to sanity. And we're going to look at what this means on the left and the right. But like I said, first, I just want to remember the victims. So both Fletcher Merkel, who was 8, and Harper Moisky, who was 10, went home to be with the Lord on the 27th. And this is the hard part about events like this, is it was such a senseless tragedy. Like, how does something like this happen? So we need to pray for their families and their communities. So senseless, so tragic, and they're both beautiful children. And the only thing we as Christians really have to hold on to is that they are with their Lord and Savior in paradise, which is the hope of every Christian on this side of heaven. So pray for their families. Okay. Like I said, it's so senseless. It's really hard to make sense of tragedy. And both the left and the right try and prescribe solutions to tragedy. Now, the left is postmodern. The left rejects religion. The left rejects truth, capital T. And that's where the transgenderism issue comes in. I believe there's a shooting in Texas, I want to say a few years ago. I'll find any news articles and link those down below, where the individual who perpetrated the mass shooting was also transgender. That got completely swept under the rug. I will say it's 2025. And while the New York Times is still, saying the shooter, she shot up the school, her motive is not known, there's still the left who's playing into this transgender delusion. But I think there is a segment of the mainstream media that is recognizing the dangers of transgenderism as an ideology. Now, what is transgenderism? It's part of the postmodern left, the neo-Marxist left that rejects religion, fundamentally rejects it. Truth, capital T, doesn't exist. Truth is relative to your experience. There is no such thing as gender. It's performative. It's not a binary. It's on a spectrum. You can be whatever you want. Now, the issue with that is it cuts away at what makes us intrinsically unique. And both Jews and Christians adhere to this idea that the Lord knits us together, as it says in the Psalms, in our mother's womb. And tied to our gender is our identity. And tied to our identity is our calling. And when you have a society that's governed by the left, by the world, by really the devil using secularism, because really secularism it's not Satanism, because they don't recognize that they're worshiping the devil, but it's still governed by the principalities of the dark forces of this world, aiming to confuse our youth about who God made them to be. So the left solution to depression and anxiety isn't the Lord or mental health or even medication. It's, oh, well, maybe you have gender dysphoria. Okay, and so then mutilate your body. Take these hormones. You'll never be able to have children if you change your mind. Your body will never look the same, especially if you're a girl and you take testosterone. Your voice will never sound the same. You'll have an Adam's apple. You'll take your breast off. These individuals will never go on to experience the joy of having children, of even experiencing pleasure. It's mutilation. And someone like Robert, who expressed that he was tired of being trans, he expressed emotional turmoil, is something that we know a lot of detransitioners also experience. And so this is a result of the fall. And when society and culture provides a solution that is antithetical to the gospel and to truth. And so the transgender identity of Robert Westman, the shooter, is a symptom of our fallen culture that has rejected Jesus, that has rejected God. We're going to look at his diary, his manifesto. Something else that I believe the enemy does then, once you have these transgender individuals who have chosen an identity other than their God-given identity, is then the lies that the devil reinforces. Because this individual expressed being tired of his transgender ideology, but then he also hated Christians, he hated Jews, he hated Trump, he hated the right, because that's what the devil does. He isolates, which makes it harder for any individual to hear the call of God back to their God-given identity. We live in a world where the devil uses confusion and depression and anxiety to alienate and confuse us. And if you don't know the voice of the Lord, you reject it, events like this are apt to happen. So if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be surprised that this happened, right? But the left says it's anything but the transgenderism, whatever. That's expected. The right, on the other hand, has used this moment in a way that I think is extremely disgusting, which is to say that this is the government, it's the CIA. We have Candace Owens. I don't want to say the whole right, but fringes of the right that are moving mainstream have said that this is the government. This was a CIA planned attack to kill Christians. And remember, the woke right means the Zionist or the Jew when they say CIA, same when they say warmonger or elite or the government. So they're making the claim that this was the Jews trying to kill Christians, which is deplorable, especially if you're Candace Owens and a self-professing Catholic, to make such an outrageous claim when you look at what was in his manifesto. So this event, terrorism and domestic terrorism, there's different definitions by different standards. This was a hate crime against Christians, against Catholics. This was also possibly domestic terrorism. So the authorities have uncovered a manifesto and disturbing online materials, including YouTube videos that depict anti-Semitism, racism, anti-Christian messaging, violent ideations, the glorification of past mass shooters. Firearm magazines bore inscriptions such as "Kill Donald Trump," as well as 6 million wasn't enough, and the names of notorious mass killers. So there was a deeply anti-Jewish angle to this as well. Now, this wasn't an anti-Semitic hate crime because the victims were Christian Catholics. So I also want to make that very clear, because I've seen some people in the pro-Israel Zionist space that this was an anti-Semitic hate crime. The victims were not Jews, but this individual espoused ideas that sound very similar to what Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson have platformed on their channels or have said. Tucker dances around it, right? Candace just says it, and we're going to look at some of her tweets. But so Candace Owens is not being intellectually honest about the fact that this individual obviously hated Jews. I'm sure she might just say that that's the Jews trying to distract us, which is so mentally unwell of Candace herself, if she were to espouse that defense of her take and analysis on this crime. But again, when you have an individual that sounds like the right and what they have culturally appropriated and made acceptable again to say about Jews, there's an issue. We're going to take a look at his diary. Because to go back to what the left is saying, this didn't have anything to do with his transgenderism. And prayers mean nothing. Okay, well, this was in the man's diary. This is him looking in the mirror with his weapons on him. There's a demon in the mirror. And there's a skull and crossbones kind of like near the head, like it's an ideation to kill, where he's being told to kill. His long hair, so his transgender ideology is depicted in this as well. If you are a Christian and you don't think that politics and culture boils down to spiritual warfare and there's a spiritual element to everything, then I don't know what else will convince you. This is literally in the diary of Robert's own sketching of what he was experiencing internally. I want to look at the anti-Jewish angle to this as well, because that does exist. Not many people have focused on that. So the guns that were used in this incident featured anti-Semitic messaging inscribed on them. So Westman's weapons bore inscriptions including 6 million wasn't enough, meaning the Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, extra Jew gas, a reference to Zyklon B, the gas chambers of the Holocaust. This is inscribed on his actual weapons. You can kind of see it here. I don't know if they have depicted it in the videos, but if you're curious, you can go look up the actual imaging yourself. And Israel must fall. They're referring to Robert as Robin. I'm going to refer to him. So he also wrote, I am a terrorist in Russian, and listed names of 6 school shooters, including Sandy Hooks. So this man was obviously deeply disturbed, but there was also an anti-Semitic angle to his worldview and ideology. He expressed that he wanted to kill kids for fun. That was written here on this magazine. This is a sketch of the church. As I mentioned, I believe the kids sat on the right and the parents sat on the left. It's the eyewitness testimony that I listened to is correct, if I'm remembering it correctly. So this is obviously premeditated. And there were statements that he had made that he wanted to commit a mass act against Zionist Jews. So there was, again, a deeply anti-Semitic angle, not to this act specifically, because this was against Christians, but to his worldview, which no doubt influenced the actions that he took. And we have seen a lot of anti-Jewish crimes happen since October 7th, when the rise of the left in America supporting not just the Palestinians, but Hamas. And then on the right, not outwardly saying they support Hamas, but being sympathetic to Islamists, while also saying that the enemy of the Christian is the Jew. And my entire point is to say, first, it's the Saturday people, and then it's the Sunday people. Saturday meaning Shabbat observant Jews, Sunday people meaning Christians. The manifesto and the rhetoric surrounding this hate crime demonstrates that there is an intrinsic Judeo-Christian link between Christians and Jews. Jews are our forefathers. Now, whether that means anything for your theology specifically, I don't know. But as a Christian, I'm very skeptical of a narrative that says that the Jews are responsible for everything, including this attack, when clearly there was an anti-Semitic angle that this individual had. He hated Jews. That was evident. And so individuals like Candace Owens, who are trying to use this event as evidence that the government is behind some anti-Christian agenda directed by Jews against Christians, is deplorable. It's really, really horrible that she would use this. And she's Catholic, as I said. I expect that from the woke left. That makes sense. But from a self-professing Catholic who believes in the Lord, I think that's pretty deplorable. Okay, so I want to look at what Candace has said, because I think it's deplorable. We see the left doing it, but I expect the left to do it. The left doesn't adhere to a higher moral authority. They reject truth, capital T. Politically and spiritually, that's a tactic that I expect from the left. From someone who's a Catholic like Candace Owens, using this to peddle an insane conspiracy theory, which is that this was a government planned attack. It's part of MK Ultra. The CIA issued it. And again, the deep state, the CIA, all of that means the Jews, as some sort of attack against Christianity by the Jewish cabal, the Jewish overlords, is really deplorable to me. Because again, we've already looked at how there is an intrinsic link between Judeo-Christian values, and this shooter was rejecting both Jews and Christians. He had a vitriol for both. Why? Because intrinsically, when it comes to transgenderism and postmodernism, Judeo-Christian values rival secularism, because we adhere to very, very similar truths about God, about our identity. And the Jews, whether or not theologically or however Judaism fits into your theology, are our forefathers. So there is a connection there. And the right is trying their darndest to make the Jews the enemy of the Christian. Not secularism, not Islamism, but the Jew. And this is how Candace is spinning it. So right off the bat, she calls on the government to release the name of the shooter. And in the past, a lot of times they're slow to release the name, probably for investigation reasons, but normally it's the media that downplays either the identity, whether it be their transgender identity. There have been other school shooters who are transgender and the media completely brushes over it. Whether it be their race, if they are Black or if they are illegal immigrants, they downplay that. And they focus simply on the shooting aspect because they want to call for gun reform, because the intersectionality or the identity of the shooter essentially undermines their entire political ethos and position. So typically I wouldn't say it's the government, it's normally the media that spins the truth. But this is my issue with Candace, because she's already conspiratorial about this. Her first tweet is, "We have zero faith in the federal government." She's already leaning into the conspiracy, and we're about to see where she snowballs with it from here. But what Candace does is the same thing what the mainstream media does, which is spin it for her own media coverage, her own worldview, her own political agenda. So she goes on to identify that the shooter was transgender, which if you look at the shooter, it's kind of like, well, no duh. So she says the shooter has his hair styled up in pigtails in the videos. He had a transgender sticker in the notebook. There will no lies told to the public this time. She needs to correct her grammar. But besides that, she's pointing out that the shooter was transgender, which is now like widely acknowledged. Again, the left is going to downplay it or just acknowledge that Robert's actually Robin and brush right over it, which again is sick because that ideology has tormented so many youth in America. They're doubling down on transgenderism because that's what they preach. But then Candace takes this many steps further. Okay, here we go. She goes on to claim that this is a deep state issue. Okay. The government is behind this. Each shooting is more traumatizing than the last because the goal is to scare us into compliance. It is the tried and true strategy of 9/11 and the Manson murders, both CIA operations. Do not ever agree to hand over your Second Amendment rights. Okay. So she's saying that this is some sort of CIA operation, which is insane. Again, remember, when Candace says CIA, she means the Jews. When she says the deep state or the government, she means the Jews. Okay. Here's another. She really went on a tweeting rampage. She says there's absolutely zero reason to believe the MK Ultra program ever stopped. A CIA program in which our government used pharmaceuticals to create clinically insane schizophrenic monsters. We see this example everywhere today. Is she a member of MK Ultra? Sounds like she's self-identifying here. These shooters are copy and paste as though they are out of a program. I think there's a lot of parallels because all of them are deeply disturbed individuals who have adhered to some sort of ideology or truth that is alternative to truth, capital T. And we live in a fallen world. And we live in a world where conspiracy theories, such as the one that she's peddling, which is exactly the same as what the shooter expressed in his manifesto, put on the internet for everyone to see. So yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense that there are some similarities between shooters. After they act, our government purports it was a lone shooter and we need gun control now to render us safer. The pattern here is obvious. The insane people are ruling over us. The entire trans movement is evident of that. Okay, so they're ruling over us. Yeah, of course, they're going to be opportunists for their own agenda, just like Candace is an opportunist for her own agenda by making this about MK Ultra. Her and Tucker do this little bit where they like call out elites and they're like, oh my gosh, look, they're lying to you. They're spinning facts. And then in doing so, follow up with not like a balanced opinion, but with an insane take that is so contrarian, so conspiratorial that they are doing the exact thing they accuse the elites or the government of doing. Here's the one where she brings the Jews into it with talking about Sigmund Freud. So someone here says these are the fruits of the Weimar Republic. So talking about Germany pre-World War II. She goes to correct Sigmund Freud and all of his buddies. The psychoanalytic movement was created by pedophiles. And she said this, right? The state of Israel was created by pedophiles as a safe haven for pedophiles. Psychology and Sigmund Freud being a Jewish last name, even though I don't believe he was a practicing Jew, I think he was secular, created psychology to brainwash individuals in order for the Jews to convert the world and persecute Christians. That is quite literally a summary of everything that she's put out on her social media. Psychoanalytic movement was created by pedophiles who sexually assaulting their own children. Again, with the grammar, Candace, slow down there. Our society has spiraled since we embraced psychotherapeutics and big pharma. I mean, big pharma, yeah, it's corrupt. I think most people would agree with that. But I don't think most people would say that is part of MK Ultra or some sort of concerted effort by the Jews to kill the Jews. There's one more. Here we go. Did we look at this tweet? Yeah, we did. There was one more. Hold on. I want to show this last one because, all right, so Candace goes on to the crux of her argument. This person, this is the shooter. This is Robert, his pigtails. This person was created by a doctor. These are the fruits of a deep state military experiment. Again, when she says deep state, she means the CIA, she means the Jews. That has been going on since the 1960s. This is why all of the shooters are exactly like the ones before. It is a factory. Again, this is not because it's MK Ultra. It is because these are deeply disturbed people who are being disturbed by many of the same demons. And there's a culture and society pointing them in different directions. And again, in closing, I want to point out that this individual's manifesto has many Israel anti-Zionist statements that reflect a very, very similar vibe to what you put out on your platform. And instead of just not acknowledging this entire event at all, Candace is using this as an example of some sort of deep state military experiment. Again, what does that mean? Some Jew orchestrated experiment against Christians. It's ridiculous. So in closing, I just want to summarize, first off, that the left and the right respond to tragedies and then they spin it for their own political aims. And unfortunately, now the right is starting to lean into a very, very dangerous ideological realm where the left has been for decades and decades. But they both have used this tragedy to push for their own political agendas. The left, gun control, prayer is not enough. The right was actually the Jews. Yeah, the deep state exists because there's corruption. The deep state doesn't equal Jew. But I want to point out just how mainstream anti-Jewish rhetoric has become. And yes, this wasn't an anti-Semitic hate crime because the victims were not Jewish, they were Christians. But this is an example of first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. The Jews are not our enemy in the way that the woke right is trying to paint. Our enemy is secularism and postmodernism and neo-Marxism on the left. So we have that kind of ideological force. And then on the right, it's Islamism. And Candace is trying to fool you, and so are many people on the right, that this is an act of violent hate crime committed by Jews against Christians, when the facts are simply not there. In fact, the facts demonstrate that she is completely wrong. And yet, just like she claims the elites do in the mainstream media and the left does, she spins it for her own corrupt agenda. And so with that, we pray for the victims' families. This is a result of a fallen world. This is a result of secularism. And this is a result of whatever is happening on the right that is popularizing anti-Jewish rhetoric. And I think people who adhere to those ideas should stop and take a beat and say, some of the things I joke about in public, or I believe about the government, or I believe about Israel or foreign policy or America sounds a lot like what was in this mass shooter's manifesto. You should take a beat and pause and question why and where you're getting this idea from. Because again, when Candace sounds a lot more like Islamist and a mass shooter, I think people on the right should stop and listen and really question why they're giving her any ounce of attention. With that, I'm going to close. Again, I want to lift up the families in prayer. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Stay safe and hug your loved ones.